Hello, and welcome to Project Super Formula 1. In this video, we will be covering all 55 races that led up to the 2025 season, starting back from the inaugural 2022 season. If you haven't already, check out the introduction video, detailing all the rules and regulations of the series, and how it was originally formed. Now, let's get ready to travel back to 2022. Super Formula 1 began in Italy at Autodromo Lago Maggiore for Race 1. It is the only race that has zero pictures coming from it, but rest assured, it did happen. Being the first race, it also served as a test and an indicator as to how future races would play out. Sergio Perez was the series' first ever pole sitter, with Carlos Sainz accompanying him on the front row. Russell and Verstappen on row 2, Leclerc and Norris sharing row 3. Pierre Gasly was the user driver and started from 11th. Pit stop windows approached a bit late in the race, and Lando Norris managed to have enough tyre life to go without pitting, which then gave him the unexpected race win, becoming the first race winner in Project SF1. Max Verstappen came in second, with Carlos Sainz finishing third. Perez had fallen victim of the pit window madness and fell to a sixth finish from pole. Race 2 took us to Autopolis, and gave us the first rain race in the series, with George Russell on pole, alongside none other than Lando Norris in second. Valtteri Bottas, the user, started in 16th but finished dead last. The race had almost no overtaking take place, with the top three finishing as they started, Russell converting pole to his first win, Norris coming second, and Perez getting third. Norris was out to an early championship lead with a first and a second in his first two races. Round 3 took place in Croatia at Dragon Trail Seaside, and marked the first ever front row lockout as Ferrari took first and second on the grid with Sainz leading Leclerc. Fernando Alonso also impressively placed his Alpine in third in front of Hamilton. Vettel was the user driver in 15th. Alonso had a tough race but was able to manage P4. And Vettel quietly rocketed through the field to take what would be his best career finish, overtaking Verstappen on the track for P5, and taking fastest lap. But up front it was total domination for Ferrari, converting their front row lockout into a 1-2 finish with Sainz winning and Leclerc coming second. Lewis Hamilton joined them on the podium in third. Race 4 took us to Barcelona, where Lewis Hamilton took his first pole, ahead of the Spaniard Sainz. Verstappen was third with Alonso starting fourth. The user driver, Lando Norris, started 12th and managed up into P9. It was Max Verstappen who would come home to take his first win with Hamilton, and then Sainz with the fastest lap not too far behind. Alonso once again finished 4th. Race number 5 saw the second ever front row lockout, this time being Mercedes, as Hamilton took a second straight pole position ahead of Russell. Verstappen and Perez were on row 2. Mercedes mishandled the race start, with Hamilton moving up the track and covering off his teammate going into turn 1, only opening the door for Verstappen to take the race lead. Midway through the race, Hamilton followed, but had a self-inflicted error, clipping the curb on entry into the bus stop and spinning, then hitting a wall trying to recover. He took damage and his race was ruined, finishing in just 17th. Up front, Max Verstappen maintained, taking his second straight win and becoming the first to win back-to-back. Leclerc came tantalizingly close in second, only by 0.08 of a second. Russell rounded out the podium, and further down the order, Williams took their first points, double points, as Latifi, who started dead last, finished 9th, and Albon, starting 19th, finished 10th. Race 6 was at Tokyo Expressway, and Verstappen, who took his first pole, caught fire. He won for a third time in a row and proved he was the real championship contender on the grid. Russell and Hamilton joined him on the podium. In round 7 at the Red Bull Ring, George Russell sat on pole position as the user driver, and was just about the only driver to hold position all race. Fernando Alonso took his first podium in SF1 in second, and Daniel Ricciardo scored his first points in the season so far, and did so with a third place. Race 8 saw us at Alsace, where Charles Leclerc took pole for his first time, but only managed to finish P5. Instead, it was none other than Max Verstappen to win for the fourth time in 5 races. Carlos Sainz came second and Sergio Perez third. So just past the halfway point in the season, Max Verstappen led the championship by 41 points ahead of George Russell in second and ahead of Leclerc, who despite not having won a race yet, still sat in third place 5 points off Russell, by finishing in the top 5 in all but one race, where he finished 6th. Round 9 took us to the legendary Spa, where Leclerc started on pole, but it was Lewis Hamilton to win for the first time in front of the pole sitter, and Russell in third. This race marked the first time Max Verstappen finished outside the points, suffering damage and finishing 17th. That 41-point lead was now a race win and a fastest lap. 26 points. At Fuji Speedway for round 10, the race had tons of battles up and down the field with great overtakes throughout, but it was Carlos Sainz to take the win, with Sergio Perez coming second, and pole sitter George Russell in third. Leclerc continued his consistency with P4, ahead of Gasly with AlphaTauri's second P5 finish of the year. Race 11 was one for the ages, as the user driver Charles Leclerc had work to do starting 9th at Ferrari's home race at Monza. Max Verstappen looked to get back on form on pole, but this race was all about the Monegasque. Flying through the field early, Leclerc spun from the lead, losing lots of his momentum, and had to climb back up the order. But that he did, and by the end, he came around Parabolica for the last time, taking his first win of his career at Monza in front of the Tifosi. The carnage that occurred during this race brought out Esteban Ocon and Pierre Gasly to accompany the Ferrari on the podium, both taking their first podiums, and Alpine's second, AlphaTauri's first. Lewis Hamilton was on pole once again, this time at Watkins Glen for round 12. Sergio Perez started in second in front of his teammate Verstappen. Unfortunately for Max, he dropped to 9th, and the championship gap was continuing to close, with Leclerc finishing 5th and George Russell 3rd. Sergio Perez, however, had his day in the sun, taking his first race win, swapping places with Hamilton, who took P2. Ferrari took their second front row lockout of the season at the Nürburgring GP layout for race 13, Sainz leading the two. The two Red Bull, despite starting P5 and P6 behind both Mercedes, chased down the lead Ferrari, to no avail. That lead Ferrari was Charles Leclerc, with a second race victory, and this one coming crucially, late in the season, but perhaps even more crucial, Verstappen did well to minimize damage, finishing third behind his teammate Sergio Perez. The penultimate race of the season, round 14, took place at Suzuka Circuit. Just as it happened with races 3 and 4, Mercedes followed a Ferrari front row lockout with one of their own. But failing to convert it to a 1-2 finish left room for the two Red Bull to do so, Sergio Perez winning the race, his second win, and Max Verstappen crucially finishing second. Carlos Sainz was the user driver and took third, George Russell finished 4th, and Charles Leclerc fell to 11th, going scoreless for the first time in the season. His 14-race top 6 streak was over, and it happened at the worst time, before the final race. That set the stage for the season finale. In Brazil, at Interlagos, 3 drivers remained in contention for the Drivers' Championship. Max Verstappen led with 201 points. Charles Leclerc was right behind with 192 points. George Russell was third with 181 points. All Verstappen had to do was finish ahead of Leclerc and Russell. Charles Leclerc had 3 options. Win with Verstappen third or lower, place second with Verstappen P6 or lower, or place third with Verstappen P8 or lower. Russell only had 2. He had to win the race. If he won with fastest lap, Leclerc would need to be P3 or lower and Verstappen P8 or lower. If he won without it, he needed Leclerc off the podium, and Verstappen P8 or lower. So there it was, the starting grid for the championship decider. Sergio Perez was on pole alongside the user driver Lewis Hamilton, but more importantly, the 3 contenders started in championship order in 3rd, 4th, and 5th. Russell and Leclerc battled each other early, but they knew their fight was with the man up the road. Leclerc chased Verstappen down and passed him on the road crucially. Leclerc then got up to his teammate Sainz, who was out of championship contention, but Ferrari did not give team orders. They let their cars race, and that Sainz did. They continue to go back and forth, but then Leclerc gets ahead. By just lap 9, Verstappen loses 2 places and falls to P6. Leclerc is doing just what he needs, and the race begins to tilt his way as he continues to go back and forth with Sainz up front. On lap 10 of 34, going into turn 1, Leclerc, still going at it with Sainz without team orders, runs into the back of his teammate, triggering damage and an instant pit stop for both Ferraris. They come around to pit, and now both of their races are just about over. George Russell now has a window, but in a direct race with Verstappen, Russell loses out. Verstappen maintains and is ahead. Mercedes allow Hamilton to race Russell considering Hamilton's blistering pace throughout the race, charging through the field. Hamilton, with damage and no tyres left, holds on to win in Brazil, but more importantly, the main storyline.
Max Verstappen crosses the line to finish second, and that is all he needs to become 2022 Super Formula One World Champion.
Ahead of both Leclerc in 14th, and even Russell in 3rd. So there it was, the debut Project SF1 season, and Max Verstappen showed his immense talent. He finished with 4 wins on 8 podiums, with 220 points total. George Russell jumped Leclerc and finished second with 196 points. The Ferrari driver came third with 192 points. With the help of Verstappen and Perez's efforts, Red Bull Racing was crowned Constructors' Champions, finishing only 36 points ahead of Ferrari. 10 points off of the Scuderia was Mercedes finishing third. The 2022 season was an instant classic, and was unlike any other season Super Formula One has had since, a mad dash to the championship in 15 races. In 2023 though, the calendar expanded, and brought new challenges to the field. 2023, the year of new. The 2023 SF1 season saw the introduction of both the Super Formula SF23, as well as 5 new races being added to the calendar. With a now 20-race calendar, the fight to put together a complete and consistent season became even more challenging. With that, all 20 drivers would now be user-controlled once in the season. The season once again began in Italy, for the Lake Maggiore Grand Prix. For the first time in his career, Fernando Alonso started on pole, in his debut with Aston Martin. He lost the lead in turn 2, but fought back for it as the race progressed. Leading on the final lap with pressure from behind, George Russell made very marginal contact to the rear of the Aston Martin, and Alonso lost the lead, dipping into the gravel. George Russell was winner of race number 1, with Alonso taking his second career podium in second and Carlos Sainz in third. Round 2 took us back to Tokyo for the Tokyo City Grand Prix, where Lewis Hamilton on pole shared the front row with Max Verstappen, a swap of last year's starting order. The result, however, was the same. Max Verstappen took his first win of the season, and winning for the second time in Tokyo. Fernando Alonso followed Lake Maggiore with another second-place finish, ahead of Charles Leclerc. Notably, Lance Stroll finished in 4th. Aston Martin had emerged from the midfield and was now a top challenger. The season travelled to Daytona for race 3, and saw George Russell on pole. Unfortunately for him, he handled the start the same way Hamilton did a year prior and covered off Sainz in second, leaving the door wide open to Max Verstappen, who took advantage. Russell fought back though, and led by over 5 seconds with 3 laps remaining. 5 seconds was not enough. Verstappen tracked him down, passing on lap 28. The Red Bull driver would go on to win back-to-back races, both at venues he won in 2022. Russell fell back into the hands of Carlos Sainz, who barely edged him out at the line and took second place. A true photo finish in Florida. The first of the 5 new tracks for 2023 was Mount Panorama, serving as round 4. Ferrari secured their third front row lockout with Leclerc on pole position. Max Verstappen split the two before they made it up the hill to turn 2. He led the race by the end of the lap. Mount Panorama ended up providing tight but entertaining racing throughout the field, and was a worthy addition to the calendar. Up front though, it was all Max Verstappen, winning his 3rd race in a row, matching his streak in 2022. Charles Leclerc managed to prevent a Red Bull 1-2, taking 2nd and Perez 3rd. Alonso had a great effort in 4th. Max Verstappen continued his top form with pole position at the Croatian Grand Prix, with Fernando Alonso on the front row alongside him. Alonso swooped into the lead into turn 2, but this race belonged to last year's pole sitter and race winner, and so for the second time, Carlos Sainz wins at Dragon Trail. But the biggest headline, Kevin Magnussen found himself ahead of the championship leader, and finished 2nd place, taking the first podium for Haas. Race 6 was in Barcelona, and saw Sergio Perez on pole. The Mexican driver, however, had a tough race, finishing in just 7th. It was the Mercedes of George Russell, taking the checkered flag and winning for the 2nd time this season. In a second weekend of unconventional podiums, an Aston Martin joined him for 2nd place. This time it was not the Spaniard, but Lance Stroll, taking his first career podium in SF1. Charles Leclerc rounded out the top 3. Zhou Guanyu took his best finish in his career in 5th. In round 7 at Autopolis, Lewis Hamilton took pole ahead of George Russell, completing the Mercedes front row lockout. It was Fernando Alonso who charged from 5th on the grid, fighting for his first race win, but ultimately Lewis Hamilton won for the first time in 2023, converting pole to a win, with Alonso in 2nd, and Leclerc in 3rd. A front row lockout for Red Bull at the Red Bull Ring with Sergio Perez out front. Fernando Alonso split the two coming out of turn 1, and eventually tracked down Perez and got into the lead. Hungry for his first win, Alonso pushed the car hard, but lost out to George Russell, last year's winner. Russell would come across the line to win again in Austria, and it was Max Verstappen and Charles Leclerc joining him on the podium. Perez finished 4th, ahead of Fernando Alonso. Round 9 took us to another debuting racetrack, Brands Hatch in the United Kingdom. Brands Hatch marked the race in which McLaren had officially arrived up front. Today, they took their first pole position, with Lando Norris ahead of Max Verstappen. Brands Hatch did not disappoint in its first running, with chaos all over the field. The focus of the race, however, quickly shifted towards Lewis Hamilton, who started from 9th, but rapidly became a winning contender through an offset strategy. The race for the lead, though, was between Lando Norris and George Russell. On lap 22, George Russell forced the McLaren out onto the gravel into Paddock Hill Bend, taking the lead. 7 laps later, Hamilton caught Norris, and Mercedes was now sat 1-2. George Russell went along to win in the UK with Hamilton behind, and Norris coming 3rd, completing an all-British podium in their home country. George Russell was given a 10-place grid penalty going into race 10 for his move to the lead on Norris, which was deemed unnecessary and out of line, considering Norris made the same move on him earlier, much cleaner that time. That took us to round 10, the 3rd new race of the season, at Kyoto Driving Park. Charles Leclerc taking pole ahead of Lewis Hamilton, Lando Norris, and then Max Verstappen. Verstappen, who fell to 5th out of turn 1, did not let his positioning stop him, as he charged back on pure pace, and won for the 4th time this season, matching his total in 2022. Lewis Hamilton joined him on the podium for a second straight P2, and Leclerc in P3, Alonso just off the podium in 4th, George Russell, serving his penalty in 19th, finished 20th, a pivotal point in his championship challenge. At the halfway mark of the season, Max Verstappen leads the championship with 160 points. George Russell runs in second, 22 points adrift, closing that gap with a recent stretch of 3 wins in 4 races. Despite the lack of a race win, Leclerc once again hangs around in 3rd and 16 points off Russell. Next, Alonso is ahead of Hamilton, 116 points to 109. Mercedes leads the constructors by 20 points ahead of reigning champs Red Bull Racing, and Ferrari in 3rd. Aston Martin sits 4th ahead of McLaren after finishing 9th a year ago. Williams is still scoreless. Race 11 took us back to Belgium, where Max Verstappen took pole. Having not scored points for the only time last season at Spa, 2023 was the Dutchman's chance to redeem himself. So as with 2023, if you thought it would be different this time, it wasn't. Verstappen won for the fifth time, by a decent margin, ahead of Carlos Sainz and Sergio Perez in third. Rookie Oscar Piastri took his best result with fifth, fellow rookie Logan Sargent scored both his own and Williams' first points of the season in eighth. Alsace was the home of round 12 and saw George Russell on pole ahead of Max Verstappen, and the constantly improving Piastri in third. The rookie lost out to experience, losing 4 places in a few corners, and falling to finish 11th. Emerging from 9th at the start was Charles Leclerc, and was quickly fighting for the lead by the halfway point. That fight reached its climax with a final lap overtake on Lewis Hamilton, giving Leclerc his first win of the season. Verstappen finished third. Williams scored points for the second weekend in a row with Alex Albon in 8th. Williams peaked in 2023 at Monza for round 13, where Alex Albon put them on pole position for the first time, in front of the home Ferrari driven by Leclerc. The race was a chaos fest, almost every car taking damage, allowing midfield starters to climb the order. Lando Norris, who started 9th, came out of it victorious, securing McLaren's first win in 2023. Another surprise podium came out of this race as Liam Lawson in his SF1 debut with AlphaTauri finished second place ahead of Alex Albon in third. AlphaTauri now had 2 podiums in SF1, both coming at Monza, and Williams now had their first podium. The fourth new track was at Deep Forest Raceway in Switzerland for race 14. Lewis Hamilton led from pole ahead of Max Verstappen. The Red Bull driver blitzed to another win, now 6 victories on the season, and his 10th in his career. Carlos Sainz in second and Sergio Perez in third accompanied him on the podium. 2023's 15th race took place at the Nürburgring, where Lando Norris was back on pole for his second time ahead of George Russell. Neither of them managed to stay up front though, as Carlos Sainz took win number 2, ahead of Lance Stroll, who brought Aston Martin back to the podium from 14th on the grid. Esteban Ocon placed third and scored his first podium since Monza 2022. Round 16 saw us at Fuji, where George Russell on pole and Lando Norris once again shared the front row. This time they both kept it under control at the front, but it was Lewis Hamilton back on the top step with Norris in second and Russell in third. Sergio Perez started on pole for race 17 at Suzuka Circuit alongside Lando Norris, who started in the top 2 for the third race in a row. This time, it paid off as the McLaren beat both Red Bulls on pace, with Norris winning ahead of Verstappen and then Perez in third. Heading into Watkins Glen for round 18, Verstappen had built such a commanding lead in the standings that the title was already within reach, and all he needed was a solid result to clinch it. Lewis Hamilton took pole ahead of Lando Norris, who once again was on the front row, showing that McLaren was now established near the front. The race, though, was between Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton, who chased down the Red Bull for an overtake with 3 corners to go, winning his third race of the season. Charles Leclerc was back on the podium in third. But the bigger story, Max Verstappen, with the second place finish, won the 2023 Super Formula 1 World Championship with 2 races to spare. The Red Bull driver sprinted to his second title through pure consistency, proving his belonging atop the throne. The 5th and final new track this season was Road Atlanta for round 19. Charles Leclerc led another Ferrari front row lockout, ahead of Carlos Sainz and 2-time world champion Max Verstappen. The race came down to a final lap scrap between Sainz and Verstappen, going wheel to wheel with just 3 corners to go. Neck and neck to the line, Carlos Sainz took the win ahead of the Red Bull, and pole-sitter Leclerc finishing third. The ever-improving Piastri finished 4th, a new personal best. The finale to the 2023 season returned to Brazil at Interlagos, where Fernando Alonso finished the season where he started, on pole position, ahead of Oscar Piastri, on the front row for the first time in his career. The good positioning proved well for the rookie, ending his first season with a first career podium in third. It was George Russell to take his 5th win of the season, ahead of Charles Leclerc, who ends the season on 3 consecutive podium finishes. 2023, The second season of Project Super Formula One was in the books, with Max Verstappen winning his second straight championship title. He finished the year winning a total of 6 races on 12 podiums for 293 points. George Russell, with his Brazil win, secured his second straight second-place finish in the championship, only 1 point ahead of his teammate Lewis Hamilton in third, 225 points to 224. The constructors saw a new champion, Mercedes-AMG, finishing first with 449 points ahead of Red Bull Racing with 438 points, only 12 points off a title defense. Ferrari once again came third, with Aston Martin jumping from 9th to 4th in a year, beating McLaren by 26 points. 2023 expanded the world of Super Formula One with 5 new races and new cars for the whole grid, but the one constant was Max Verstappen standing alone at the top of Project Super Formula One. Verstappen showed pure dominance throughout the season, and raised an essential question: could anyone stop the Red Bull driver from continuing his reign? If there's anything we learned from the first 2 seasons, it's that consistency is the key to championship-level success, and consistency was the story of 2024. With a 4th team emerging from the upper midfield and entering contender territory, season number 3 was bound to be the closest ever. We returned to Lake Maggiore for the season opener. Lewis Hamilton put his Mercedes on pole ahead of the 2-time reigning champion Max Verstappen. Sainz and Norris followed. Another chaotic start to the season ensued as none of them made the podium. George Russell kicked off 2024 with a race win, ahead of Oscar Piastri, taking his second podium both in a row and in his career, and Fernando Alonso, finishing in the top 3 for the second year in a row. Race 2 took us back to Tokyo Expressway, where Max Verstappen took pole alongside Charles Leclerc, with George Russell and Lando Norris behind. The winner came from outside the top 4, charging through the field. Oscar Piastri, who started 6th on the grid, came through the pack to take his first win in Super Formula One. His last 3 races had resulted in a 3rd, 2nd, and now 1st place finish. Leclerc was able to get ahead of Verstappen as the two joined the McLaren on the podium. Australia came in round 3 as we returned to Mount Panorama. Lando Norris took his first pole of the season, but suffered damage and fell to 14th. It was Max Verstappen, from 2nd on the grid, to win for the 2nd time in Bathurst. Lewis Hamilton made his first appearance on the podium in 2024 alongside teammate George Russell in 3rd, Piastri finished just off the podium in 4th, and Lance Stroll rounded out the top 5. Round 4 marked the earliest in the season we visited Suzuka, where Carlos Sainz went on pole in front of George Russell. Sainz nearly lost the lead into turn 1 with Russell getting ahead, but regained quickly. The race was between the Ferrari and the Mercedes, and it wasn't until lap 18 that Russell finally got ahead at 1:30 r. Russell went on to win the race ahead of Sainz, with Piastri returning to the podium in 3rd from 6th. Hülkenberg and Perez went wheel to wheel and had a photo finish to the line for 8th. At Autopolis for race 5, Oscar Piastri took his first pole of his career ahead of the 2 Red Bulls Verstappen and Perez, and his McLaren teammate Norris. For the 3rd time in its history, the pole sitter at Autopolis defended position and won. Piastri took win number 2 ahead of Perez, taking his first podium of the year ahead of Norris, who completed the double podium for McLaren. After 5 races, Oscar Piastri led the championship by 24 points ahead of George Russell, and then Max Verstappen in 3rd. The McLaren driver had started the season with 2 wins on 4 podiums, finishing in the top 4 every race so far. Race 6 was the first of our 3 races in the States, at Daytona International Speedway. Max Verstappen, having won here twice, started on pole for the first time ahead of Sainz and Leclerc, and Perez 4th. The Red Bull, unlike the 2 pole sitters before him, defended his line into turn 1 and led the early portions of the race. Piastri, from 8th on the grid, still managed top 5. Even with that finish though, the championship gap tightened to 9 points that quickly. Because from 7th at the start, George Russell came through and won at Daytona for the first time, after starting pole and playing runner-up to Verstappen in 2023 and finishing 3rd in 22. Verstappen managed 2nd, and Sainz took his 2nd straight podium at the Speedway, his teammate Leclerc behind in 4th. Round 7 took us back to the villages of Alsace, where Charles Leclerc, last year's winner, started on pole ahead of the championship leader, Sainz, Norris, and Verstappen. The Ferrari wasn't able to hold on, as the speed of McLaren number 4 sifted through the field, and Norris took his first win of 2024. Verstappen followed him up the order with a solid P2, and pole sitter Leclerc finished 3rd ahead of Piastri and his main rival Russell P5. Lando Norris, on pole for the first time this year, led the field at Dragon Trail ahead of 2-time winner Carlos Sainz, then Hamilton and Piastri. Experience boded well for the Ferrari driver as he quickly took the race lead into turn 2, and Piastri followed him through. He quickly lost the lead to Piastri by lap 2, but the McLaren had a bigger problem, with the Red Bull of Max Verstappen quickly making work of the field and taking the race lead. The race unfortunately lost many front-runners to damage, including Piastri, who eventually fell to finish 9th, ending his top 5 streak after 8 races. The midfielders took advantage of the carnage, as the Haas of Nico Hülkenberg found himself in P2 ahead of a Ferrari, and the likes of Ocon, Alonso, Tsunoda, and Ricciardo, all eager at a chance for a podium. On the final lap, Leclerc put his Ferrari back into 2nd, while Ocon and Hülkenberg battled for the last spot. In the end, it was the Haas staying ahead and taking 3rd place, securing his team's 2nd ever podium, both coming in Croatia. But up front, it was Max Verstappen to take win number 2 on the season, and crucially, jumping to the lead of the championship standings by 5 points. Russell was another victim of damage and ended up outside the points in 12th. The season returned to Japan, at Fuji Speedway for race 9. Lando Norris was back on pole ahead of Carlos Sainz and Oscar Piastri. Sainz, winner in 2022, got ahead of the McLaren and won for the 2nd time at Fuji, with Norris in 2nd and Piastri back with a 3rd place performance and tightening the gap just ahead of Max Verstappen. George Russell once again fell down the order, starting in 7th and finishing 10th. His title bid was in a dangerous place, now 28 points off the lead. Barcelona was the host of round 10. George Russell, with a chance to rebound, started on pole position as Mercedes locked out the front row with Hamilton in 2nd. Verstappen and Leclerc shared row 2. The lead Mercedes did exactly what he needed to do, George Russell winning in Spain for the 2nd year running, ahead of 6th place starting Lando Norris and Lewis Hamilton. Oscar Piastri just missed out in 4th ahead of Esteban with a season-best 5th, but importantly, Max Verstappen dropped out of the points in 11th, handing the title lead back to Oscar Piastri by 10 points. Russell had rebounded though, now only 13 points adrift. So at the halfway point of 2024, Oscar Piastri, the newcomer, Max Verstappen, the 2-time reigning champion, and George Russell, the 2-time runner-up, headlined a 3-horse race for the championship. It was clear that the champ would not have an easy road to a 3rd title this year, but he wasn't going to give up his throne without a fight, and was well within it at the halfway point of the season. Austria, home of the Red Bull Ring, was the scene for race 11. Max Verstappen sat on pole position for the first time at his team's home race. And right alongside him, Oscar Piastri, never letting the champion rest. Behind those two, George Russell. The top 3 fully consisted of the championship top 3. But it was number 4 in the standings, Charles Leclerc, who started from 7th, and came through to win for the first time this season. Norris took an important 2nd place from 6th on the grid, and Russell 3rd. It was Piastri finishing in 4th, and Verstappen in 5th. A return to Great Britain in round 12 for Brands Hatch. Last year's winner George Russell started on pole ahead of last year's pole sitter, Lando Norris, and Max Verstappen was in 3rd. But from fourth on the grid, Lewis Hamilton, who took P2 a year ago, took a magical win in his home race, making it 2 British winners in the first 2 years of Brands Hatch. Carlos Sainz returned to the podium in second as well as Max Verstappen doing so in third. The pole sitter Russell dropped to sixth, but it was Oscar Piastri, once again refusing to let the Red Bull breathe and finishing fourth. Round 13 gave us another race at Kyoto Driving Park where Max Verstappen returned to pole ahead of Lando Norris, Charles Leclerc, and Oscar Piastri. Norris had a poor pull off the grid and quickly lost ground to Leclerc into turn 1, but regained that ground just as quickly and was back in second, but he wasn't done. Positioning himself perfectly coming out of turn 6, the McLaren was ahead of Verstappen before they got to the braking point into turn 8. The second McLaren soon came through and challenged his teammate Norris for the lead, fully ahead at 1 point, before Norris was able to retake race lead. Piastri then dropped to P8, as it was Norris who maintained race lead and took his second win of the season, ahead of Max Verstappen in second, retaking the championship lead. Lewis Hamilton continued his form with another podium in second. George Russell capped off the top 5 behind Alonso in fourth. Back at Circuit de Spa-Francorchamps for round 14, and Lewis Hamilton started on pole ahead of last year's race winner Verstappen. The championship top 3 had to take a backseat in Belgium, as Hamilton converted pole to a second win, ahead of the 2 Ferraris Leclerc and Sainz. George Russell came out 4th ahead of Yuki Tsunoda in 5th. 6th, 7th, and 8th consisted of Norris, Verstappen, and Piastri. Russell had now equaled Piastri on points, taking second in the standings due to having one more race win. Race 15 at the Nürburgring was won for the ages, as Lando Norris started on pole, ahead of George Russell and Lewis Hamilton. The Nürburgring saw lots of damage throughout the field, but Oscar Piastri sifted through the drama from 8th on the grid, going for a race win. His starting position was too far back, and with a struggle for pace around the track in addition to a poor strategy call, he brought the car home in third. In another surprise effort, it was Nico Hülkenberg who miraculously took Haas's second podium of the season in second place. But it was none other than Max Verstappen to win for the third time in 2024, and critically, strengthened his championship lead from 7 points to 17. Piastri was now back ahead of Russell though, as the Mercedes fell to 10th. The Tifosi were treated to their Ferrari of Charles Leclerc on pole for the first time at Monza for round 16, having won the race in 2022. George Russell joined him on the front row, and Sainz and Piastri were behind. The crowd roared in approval as Sainz got ahead of the Mercedes, making it Ferrari 1-2 coming out of turn 1. Unfortunately for them, their drivers couldn't hold the McLarens from coming through, and Lando Norris led the 2 into the lead. The cars went for wide into turn 1 late in the race, Norris keeping the lead even with jumping the curb. The 2 McLarens lead up front on the final lap, but Max Verstappen sent it down the inside of Piastri coming around Parabolica for the final time, and taking second place from the Australian. The Red Bull driver proved he was going to take the fight directly to Piastri on track if he were to lose his title, and now led by 20 points, the most since taking the lead for the first time in 2024. George Russell finished 9th, and after losing ground and regaining it in the standings during the middle portion of the season, had now dropped out of the top 3 as Lando Norris now sat 3rd in the title fight. Max Verstappen continued to perform with another pole coming in race 17 at Deep Forest Raceway. The Red Bull driver led Lando Norris, Lewis Hamilton, and Charles Leclerc off the grid. But someone else had something to say about a title defense. Oscar Piastri threw another punch and landed in first place from a sixth-place start on the grid, showing that he wasn't going to back down from the reigning champ. Lando Norris continued his consistent performances with a second place, completing McLaren's first ever 1-2 finish in SF1. Charles Leclerc joined them on the podium in front of Hamilton, and pole-sitting Verstappen only managed fifth, allowing a huge championship swing. That 20-point lead was now 6 points. Road Atlanta was the site of round 18, and hosted the highest stakes front row made up by Verstappen on pole, and Piastri alongside in second. The two came off the line with Verstappen defending the lead into turn 1, but Piastri still found an opening around the outside and swooped into the lead early. Verstappen came back at the McLaren on lap 10, the two even banging wheels, as Verstappen took the lead. Neither of them, however, could fend off the Mercedes of George Russell from undercutting them, and winning for the 5th time in the season. But critically, Piastri beat out Verstappen for second, the Red Bull coming third. Yuki Tsunoda took his best career result in 4th. Lando Norris suffered damage early and fell to 16th, but was still third in the standings. The penultimate round of the 2024 season took place at Watkins Glen. McLaren saw a front row lockout as Lando Norris started on pole position ahead of Oscar Piastri, the two Ferraris on row 2 and Mercedes on row 3. Max Verstappen, the championship leader by 3 points, was starting down in 7th place while his main rival started second and first. The two McLarens took off running 1 and 2 in the early phase of the race, but on lap 8, Piastri, after having already pitted, slammed into the back of a slower Esteban Ocon on an in-lap and suffered front wing damage. His advantage in starting position was now gone. He went on to finish 10th. Max Verstappen finished 8th, advantage, Max. Up front, Fernando Alonso was fighting for a race win, what would be his first. He had successfully beat Lando Norris out of the pits, but it wasn't enough. The McLaren caught the Aston Martin, and soon, Lewis Hamilton did as well. Lando Norris stood alone out front as he took his 4th race win of the season. Hamilton came in second ahead of Fernando Alonso, back on the podium for the first time since the season opener. So, for the second time, the Super Formula 1 Championship came down to the season finale. Max Verstappen was 6 points ahead of Oscar Piastri, and 22 points ahead of Lando Norris. Piastri and Verstappen were tied on race wins at 3, meaning that if they came out of the race tied, Max would win the championship 4-2 on second-place finishes, and 10-9 on total podium finishes. All the defending champion needed to do was to finish ahead of Oscar Piastri. Nothing else mattered. Oscar Piastri had multiple paths to the championship. A race win would seal it, as would a podium finish with the fastest lap as long as Verstappen finished 3rd, 5th, or lower. If Piastri finished off the podium, he needed Verstappen to finish at least 3 positions behind him unless Piastri finished 4th, in which case he still needed the fastest lap to secure the title. Lando Norris had one option: win the race, and have Verstappen finish 9th or lower, and Piastri in 7th or lower. The 2024 season finale. The title decider. Interlagos, Brazil. George Russell started on pole position. Behind him, Oscar Piastri in 2nd, Lando Norris 3rd, and Max Verstappen 4th. 3 contenders, all alongside one another, for one last shot at a championship. Early on, Verstappen took the fight straight to Piastri, battling it out on track. As he had all year, the Australian refused to back down. Over halfway through the race, the 3 championship challengers ran 1, 2, and 3. Norris leading them. The final stops. The final pit stop of the race came on lap 27 for Max Verstappen. Red Bull had committed to another undercut attempt on Piastri, hoping to gain an advantage in their race with the McLarens. That was not the race Verstappen came out of the pits in. Coming out in 13th place, Verstappen was now stuck behind midfielders in their own battles, already having pitted. Two laps later, Piastri came out of the pits in P4, and well ahead of any drama from behind. Verstappen clawed and clawed trying to clear the midfielders, but he was pushing too hard trying to do so. Piastri, on the other hand, tracked down Lewis Hamilton and moved back onto the podium. On lap 34, Max Verstappen pushed back up to P7, needing to get to P5 now, to tie Piastri on points which would win him the title. But on lap 37 of 38, 1 lap to go, Max Verstappen ran out of tyres, pushing them over the limit in the final stint, and had to pit from his late charge. The two-time reigning champion finished in 14th place. His title defense was now over. The door was now opened, and Lando Norris was at the door. He took the fastest lap and claimed a dominant win, making it his 5th of the season, a 26-point haul. But then, all eyes shifted behind him, because while the top step belonged to Norris, the title didn't. Oscar Piastri crossed the line in 3rd place. A continued story of steady consistency throughout the season. And it finally paid off.
Oscar Piastri is the 2024 Super Formula One World Champion! And Max Verstappen has finally been dethroned! What a race! What a season!
Fernando Alonso wrapped up his season with another podium finish in 2nd, and Yuki Tsunoda equaled a career-best result with 4th. 2024, Season 3 of Project Super Formula One introduced a new champion. Oscar Piastri was world champion by 6 points, on only 3 race wins, accompanied by a total of 10 podiums. He never finished outside of the points all season, the only driver to accomplish the feat. Lando Norris, having caught fire in the second half of the season, leapfrogged Max Verstappen in the final race, and finished 2nd in the championship, 4 points ahead of the former champion in 3rd. Perhaps the biggest improvement of all, McLaren, who finished 6th in 2022 and 5th in 2023, jumped up to finish 1st and win the Constructors' title for the first time, a commanding 114 points ahead of the 2023 champion Mercedes team. Red Bull was able to hold off Ferrari, finishing in 3rd by only 5 points. 2024 gave us the most dramatic championship finish Super Formula One has seen so far. A rookie Oscar Piastri took his first podium in the final race of 2023, and took all his constantly building momentum into a championship charge, dethroning the two-time reigning champion Max Verstappen, proving that in some cases, even consistency can conquer dominance. And in 2025, we could see a mixture of everything, because the field has been blown wide open. Be on the lookout for the first recap of the 2025 season opener, the Bathurst Grand Prix. After that, all remaining 20 races of the 2025 season will be uploaded in a race highlights format. Subscribe to stay tuned, and get ready to strap in to Project Super Formula One.